Bonjour à tous. Je commencerai d'abord par remercier très chaleureusement les organisateurs du forum pour m'avoir invité à parler ce matin. C'est pour moi un très grand plaisir d'être ici, de retour à Montréal, dans cette ville que j'aime tant, et de pouvoir introduire votre session plénière. Je parle devant vous comme premier président de la Cour des comptes française, une grande institution républicaine, comme un croyant dans le projet européen que j'ai servi comme parlementaire européen, ministre des Affaires européennes, commissaire européen, ministre des Finances. But since I know that English is the working language of this conference, I will speak to in this language. I'm convinced that the stakes of thriving in the world of transition, such as our collective ability to foster economic stability and to fund innovation towards the green and digital transitions, are global issues. And it's a unique occasion to reflect on our world, and for me, with a special focus on Europe. This century is a century of crises. Look at what we've gone through already. There was a financial crisis for us in Europe, the Greek crisis, then the Eurozone crisis, a migration crisis, of course, the COVID, a tremendous event that changed all our lives. We are also in tough times as far as democracy is concerned. We've got climate change, and for us in Europe, war is back on our continent with the Russian aggression towards Ukraine. This creates a unique danger and a bit more than uncertainty. In the context of Europe on our soil, of war in our soil, and the outlook of growth and inflation remaining bleak, I would like to use this opportunity to discuss the economic situation in Europe and the lessons we have learned from the situation. I would like to start by underlining the extraordinary level of uncertainty our economies are currently facing. The economic consequences of inflation, exacerbated by the energy crisis and the war in Ukraine, have largely derailed the post-COVID-19 recovery. Since February 2022, the supply of fossil fuels, of food products, raw materials have been drastically reduced. As a result, as you know, annual inflation in the Eurozone reached a record high of 8.4% in 2022. Now, it seems that it is diminishing, slowing down, due partly to a strong monetary policy led by the ECB. We are probably over the peak in Europe, and monetary policy, I imagine, is going to gradually stabilize. Growth is weak and uneven in Europe. You might have read news about technical recession in Europe last week. This is true. But as a matter of fact, technical is the important word. That means two trimesters in a row with a recession. But now I think the economy is going to recover, and we will have a positive year of growth, even slow, in the EU. The leading economy in Europe, Germany, as you may know, has its shortcomings and problems, due partly to its dependence as well to Russia and to China, to a change also in the supply chains. But this economy, as always, will overcome, even if I think its model needs to be changed. As far as my country, France, is concerned, I think the French economy has shown good signs of resilience in 2022 with strong support measures that had positive effects on economic growth. France's economy still grew by 2.6% in 2022, following a strong recovery in 2021. We still, I think, are going to have growth between 0.6 to 1% in 2023, and we have avoided a recession. Despite this uncertainty, I remain rather confident that the European economy and the French economy are resilient due to a good competitiveness and attractiveness, and thanks to many industrial champions and strong financial sector, partly strong and sound in my country, I believe. However, a cause for concern, and to me, of course, it's very important in my current job, is the situation of a country's public finances, especially in the Eurozone. Post-COVID-19 fiscal consolidation efforts in the Eurozone are now threatened by the energy and inflation crises. Due to the COVID-19 crisis, the debt to GDP ratio in the Eurozone reached 100.5% in 2021 before falling sharply to reach 91.6% in 2022. But this fiscal consolidation trend is being now threatened by the energy crisis, as I said, which calls for further fiscal support. Member states' situation with regard to debt ratios and public bond yields still looks very heterogeneous, and this poses a risk of divergence in the Eurozone, which, resembles some 20 countries now. And we need to be vigilant about the level and trajectory of European member states' public debt. Against this backdrop, I would argue that reducing our public debt is essential. First, as Europeans, we belong to a single currency, and belonging to a single currency creates duties. We must move by the rules, even if these rules are now suspended and need to be reformed. I will come back on this. It's a question of collective discipline. And second, and perhaps for me it's more important, future growth in every country depends on its ability to finance decisive investments for the future in fields as diverse as green transition, of course, innovation, education, defense, and health. Health being a very strong and important challenge for industry and for society. And to do so, we have to recover fiscal leeway by reducing the burden of public debt in a context of interest rates which are rising and persistent inflation. We are in a time of we are facing a paradox. We probably need more public investment, a more important role of the state than in the last decades because of this high level of investment. But if we don't reduce our public debt, we won't be capable. We cannot make it. And this is why reducing public debt is so important. It's about, again, room of maneuver. Therefore, how can we build a framework for resilient growth through the next years and decades? I'm convinced that the path towards resilient growth is twofold. First, we need to move forward on a sustainable growth path based on strategic autonomy. This is a word which is now very important in the European construction, and green transition. And second, as Europeans, need to deepen and strengthen the Eurozone, which is certainly a very important partner in the world now. First, we need to move towards a sustainable growth path. That means strategic autonomy and green transition. Europe has made a significant step forwards on its path to decarbonation and strategic autonomy. The 2019 Green Deal and the 2021 Fit for 55 plans are the first pieces of EU legislation to set out an ambitious decarbonation strategy for the European Union. It is a major step for the EU to set the tone, to create a leadership on how to mitigate climate, both in the EU and abroad, with the carbon border adjustment mechanism. Despite these advances, I still identify two main risks on our path to resilient and green growth. The first risk is that some countries would not be able to face the wall of investment I mentioned and that the energy transition requires. It is true that financing instruments deployed have reached an unprecedented scale, but they will not be sufficient. In the EU alone, and we are just a small part of the world, even if it's an important one, the European Investment Bank estimates that more than 1,100 billion must be invested each year between now and 2030. How are we going to get in? And that's why reducing public debt, again, is so important. The investment challenge is all the greater given that the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, presented by the Biden administration, is exerting strong competition on Europe and attracting green investment flows. A major risk for Europe today is that the companies it needs to ensure this transition would choose to locate the production sites in the US. For example, the famous German car manufacturer Volkswagen has announced that it is putting on hold its plans to set a battery mega plant in Germany in order to study a location in the US. This might be called protectionism. At least it is competition. And we are now planning to respond to that, to respond to the IRA without protectionism, and to improve the EU's competitiveness. The European Commission plans a green industrial plan, the first pillar of which, called the Net Zero Industry Act, was presented on March 16, so a few weeks ago. It will grant greater regulatory flexibility and more funding to green industries, with objective for 2030 that the European production of net zero technologies should represent at least 40% of the Union's annual demand. So the whole question about this is how to compete without deglobalizing and without creating a new protectionism. And for that, we need to discuss at the global level. The second risk is that of an increase in the EU's dependence on certain countries supplying raw materials need to ensure its energy and industrial autonomy. The Union response to the challenge of critical raw materials has been specified by a draft legislation on critical raw materials. The text should enable the EU to secure the supply of 18 metals considered as essentials. But more than that, we need to build alliances where private and public fundings are authorized as the best tools to accelerate both strategic autonomy and sovereignty, which go all together. The second challenge, the last one for me, therefore, is the strengthening of the Eurozone. If you look at Europe now, what do you see? War. And you see also that Europe is going to enlarge again. The future of Europe is not to be 6 like in the beginning, or 12, or 15, or 27 like now. It's to be around 35 countries. And after the war, in the decades to come, we'll need to integrate Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, and also the Balkans countries. This is about ethics. It's about responding to Russia's aggression. It's about our collective security. This is about geopolitics. But this new Europe is going to be geopolitical and political. The economy will need a core, and the core European economy is the Eurozone. This is certainly the future of a partnership between the Americas and Europe. First, to strengthen the Eurozone, the European Commission has made reforms regarding the EU's fiscal coordination framework, but we need to go further. That means we need to change the rules of what we call the Stability and Growth Pact to make them more flexible, more efficient, more intelligent than they are today, more adapted to the situation of more heterogeneous countries. Secondly, on the financial stability front, we need to complete the banking union. We need to establish something we lack, which is a capital markets union. This would make it possible to strengthen the integration of the financial sector, to ensure better sharing of macroeconomic risk between private actors. And finally, on this front, as you know, we responded to COVID with a new plan called Next Generation EU, the first plan, massive plan of investments of 750 billion euros. This is a break for Europe. In my view, this must not be and should not be a one-off. It must be the start of something new, which does not exist already, which is a kind of permanent fiscal capacity for the EU. The EU is not going to be a state. It's not even going to be a federal state, but certainly the core of Europe. Our public policy tools needs to be reinforced, and deepening the economic and monetary union, therefore, is absolutely necessary to averting future economic and financial crisis. And this brings me to my final words of conclusion. The situation we're living in is certainly unprecedented in many ways. The uncertainty we are facing on the economic and fiscal front is a cause of concern for many of us, and we are not innocent here. We all know that. Yet, being surrounded with people who share commitment, who lead the economy, like in this place, be it in policy making or business, gives me great confidence in our collective ability to overcome the challenges ahead. This is a time of uncertainty. It is more than that. It is certainly a time of danger for the world, but it also can be a time of opportunities, of creation, a time for innovation, for scientific progress. And in this respect, such events as this one are invaluable forums to exchange the ideas and solutions that will drive us forward. Merci beaucoup pour votre attention et je vous souhaite à tous d'utiles et fructueuses discussions. Merci.
My privilege this morning, c'est mon privilège d'être accompagné de deux leaders exceptionnels. His Excellency Sultan bin Saeed Al Mansoori, bienvenue à Montréal. His Excellency served as Minister of Economy with the government of the United Arab Emirates, and he holds a bachelor's degree in industrial engineering. Quite interesting. We have two engineers on stage this morning, quite relevant for climate transition, eh? In addition to he currently serves as Special Envoy for Canada since last December and former Minister of the Economy. So really grateful to have the perspective of your perspective on the panel. We also have Mr. Low, CEO of Singapore Exchange since July 2015. Finance industry, but also, as mentioned earlier, an engineering background, very interesting climate crisis, and that's the skills we need. We'll need nature, we'll need biologists for nature transition, we need engineers for climate transition. So we just heard the European view, and now we have the Asian and the Emirates view. Quite a privilege. Thank you to the Conférence de Montréal to bring those perspectives to the stage. You've demonstrated exceptional leadership in the past in driving transitions, and you continue to do so. So the theme of this conference is thriving in a world of transition. It's really, how do we take a crisis, something challenging, and get positive out of this? So it would be very interesting for the audience to get some of your wisdom on previous crises that you've turned into positive. Why don't we start with you, His Excellency?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anne-Marie. Bonjour, good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, let me just first thank you and the organizer also for this wonderful organization of this conference. Probably myself and my colleague from Singapore came the longest. So we are still jet lagged in a way, but we are actually very happy and revived to be here with you this morning. As an engineer, of course, I think we need to adjust to so many different circumstances. And I think because we work in a structured way, we have the ability to be able to address many issues. But what is important in this also is leadership and the ability to make the whole team work together. I actually saw it very clearly during the crisis of the COVID of the 2020. Of course, it hit us very hard. This is all over the world. We were not ready as government representative. My capacity as a Minister of Economy, it was, number one, a very difficult situation for us because we had a double hit around that time, and explain to you where is this double hit is coming from. If you go back to the first months of 2020, the prices of oil actually went negative. So meaning cost of production is actually more than the cost of barrel of oil, of the sale of barrel of oil. At the same time, you have this big, new, mysterious virus which is going around the world. And by the way, around that time, I was traveling from the US, going to Mexico, going to Colombia with a delegation. I could see the way this was spreading. You remember, from Italy, from China, from other parts of the world, and moving more and more toward the West. By the time I got to the UAE, which was around second half of February, it was already big news all over the world. And hence, for us or for myself, it was a big challenge of how do we address that? Because the controls of this is basically on the virus itself, and how we have the ability to control the virus in terms of spreading within our society, within our country, within the globe. Because there is no sense of being safe in the UAE where the others are actually suffering. So there has been a plan of 3 waves, what we call at that time. One, how to contain the virus. Because by containing it, you have much better chances of opening your economy at an earlier stage than others. So the government has worked together in a very sort of systematic way to be able to come with a strategy. The strategy that leads at the end of the day that once we are stable as a country in terms of the virus spread, we can actually jumpstart very quickly the economy. And sometimes people say, the crystal ball and everything about the possibility of predicting what happened through that. In reality, if you use science, it's better, it's actually good, and the right people for it. It's actually, you can manage that. And what we did is the following. The first stage was the lockdown. Of course, lockdown, as you know, no businesses, no schools, everything stops. For us as a major hub of the world, one of the major hubs of the world, transit, passenger, cargo, and everything, that also stopped. So all of a sudden, the whole economy stopped. Government got involved with their support to small and medium-sized enterprises, but that does not really give you the sustainability at the end of the day. So it was quick action from the government to first, with myself and the team from our side, to put that 3 levels plan by which addressing the issue of stopping the economy itself, which is the locking of the economy. The second one, which is the second stage, which is mainly focusing on how do we pick the different parts of the economy, the sector of the economy that can be opened and closed. So it was not, the second stage was not a full closure of the economy, but as the number of cases were going down, we were opening different parts of the economy, the sector of the economy, to be able at least to sustain some growth within certain sectors. The third wave was mainly focusing on growth. We started that from March 2020, went into September 2021. September 21 was the plan to have the full opening of the economy and basically enjoy the growth. And by the way, the result of that was the following. This is just to show you what happened there. The growth in the economy in 2021 went up by 3.6%. 2022, it hit more than 7%. They were also, 2022 was the best year performance for the economy and the corporation in the UAE. I would like to also to draw one point, maybe in Canada and maybe in the West, it's not an issue. But for us as a desert nation, 85% of our food products are actually imported from all over the world. Now, at the time of the crisis, this is something you would not expect, to be a critical issue and an issue priority for as a nation, but it was for us because the supply chain, the global supply chain was disrupted. All of a sudden, there is a reserve of 3 months in terms of different food items that we could use. And we sort of went into an emergency mode. This is behind the scenes. We could not tell the people that this is what's happening because we need to keep the situation calm. Meanwhile, in the background, we're working very hard to addressing that issue. What came out from that as a positive result is the following. The UAE built and actually came with a regulation governing the food security and the storage, minimum storage of 20 main items, food items that should be within a minimum storage percentage of at least 30%. The second, investment in the agriculture sector, including technology. For example, vertical farming became a big business. A lot of international companies also were coming to us to offer their technology and capability. Emirates Airline already installed one of the largest vertical farms on Dubai International Airport, which actually produce for the catering of their aircrafts who are flying around the world. And by the way, they are coming here, Emirates Airline, on July of this year, will be their inaugural flights to Montreal. So with this in mind, I think these 3 areas that we have faced during the crisis, what really come out from that, government can actually get their act together. Once they are under pressures like that, even though our government is very efficient, but we saw the efficiency, the high efficiency of the government of the UAE during this crisis. And at the same time, we did not forget the rest of the world. We actually helped in many ways, either in terms of the respiratory machines, in terms of the vaccination, to more than 135 countries around the world, including some of the European countries, which I will not also mention here. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Mr. Loh, you've seen the crisis flow through the financial markets in Singapore and Asia, across Asia, actually. Would you like to share any lessons learned in the past, and what are your thoughts on the future of Asia amid this uncertainty?
Thank you, and very glad to be here this morning, and good morning, everyone. If I try and look through the pandemic and the lens of transition, how can we all try and turn a negative into positive? Looking back, roughly now slightly over 25 years, when we had the 97, 98 financial crisis in Asia, I think throughout that, what we learned is a crisis is never a last crisis. You got to expect the next one, and thereby planning ahead, getting ready, being prepared, I think was important in that period. Some markets in Asia were closed, investors lost money, and it took a while for the markets to recover. But many governments whose country undergone such crisis took a very long-term view to really develop and internationalize their capital markets. And fast forward 25 years later, and in between, we did have the 2008 financial crisis. We obviously also had in the early 2000s the SARS episode in parts of Asia. And going through COVID-19, I think a few things came out amongst many different countries in Asia. Generally, most countries were better prepared. They invested in public healthcare. And importantly, through that crisis, markets were kept open. And in today's world, where markets are clearly more complex and interconnected, and information flowing much quicker, leaving markets open was crucial. Who would have thought, without the preparedness and planning, that financial institutions, including exchanges like the SGX, was able to operate with less than 5% of our staff in the office. And that was through a lot of planning, that knowing that the last crisis won't be the last. But if I now look at the context of today and fast forward a couple of years, I think Asia has tremendous opportunity. Even if I look at ASEAN, which is 10 countries, it is about half the size of Canada, but 18 times the number of people. And as a bloc, it's projected to be the fourth largest economic bloc in 7 years' time, 2030. And obviously, with a rising China economically, we also have a very dynamic India, and Singapore sits right in the middle of that. And there are many opportunities to look at investing in Asia. And the last point I made is turning negative into positive and learning through that. It is really also deep planning and collaboration. In Singapore, Singapore Airlines, in that pandemic, they kept the planes flying empty, so that in the rebound, you don't have to scramble to hire back the pilots and your crew. And today it is operating at almost full capacity in countries that have allowed planes back. And also for us as an exchange at the SGX, we have forged many partnerships in the last few years with the China exchanges, with the ASEAN exchanges, even with New Zealand exchange, to really broaden and deepen capital markets. And I think that will serve everyone well as global participants in the global ecosystem, because the last crisis is never the last.
Thank you. So, His Excellency, if you're comfortable, we're going to talk about the elephant in the room.
Of course.
The fact that the UAE is hosting COP28, and that's creating some controversy. I suspect most ordinary people are skeptical of actions taken in their own country. And when we look at the EU, how the heck are you going to be able to drive to align the economy to 1.5 degree? That's probably the reason why some people are skeptical. And let's say the activists are doing a good job to nurture this skepticism. We all know, though, that when there's a will, there's a way, and we can't align the economy to 1.5 without you. And we can't align the economy to 1.5 without small businesses or without the South. You were the first Middle Eastern nation to sign the Paris Agreement. The first country in the region to submit a national determined contribution in 2015. And you recently set higher ambition for your target for for reducing carbon emissions, 31% by 2030. Lots of countries will not achieve that. That was from your previous 22.5 original target. So your ambition is clearly laid out and your actions are coming along. So tell us more about your ambitions, progress made, critical challenges you will face, and what's your strategy to address them. Feel free to bring global perspective with the COP28 or local perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think being a nation that is rich in hydrocarbon, oil and gas in this case, maybe it brings also a little bit more of accusation about the effect on the environment in terms of emission. But we recognize that at a very early stage, simply because the UAE as a nation, as people also, we're very much connected to the environment, our environment, the sea, the desert. It's part of us. This is something that it was not something we sort of caught up with after all these regulations and laws start coming up here, around the world. Protecting the desert, protecting our sea shores is an important traditional sort of built in our system as Emiratis. And this is where, adding up to more of what the international organization have actually put in there as a objective to be reached by 2050, we worked on it actually very, very fast, very quickly as a nation, but also some regulation that we have had within the UAE more than 50 years back. I mean, this is probably a surprise to a lot of you, were led by our late president, who actually lived most of his life or came from the desert, so he appreciated and understood the importance of preserving nature. Now, the UAE being the eighth largest producer of oil in the world, seventh largest country in terms of oil reserve, around 100 billion barrels. It's quite also a challenge to jump into and take a lead in the region on an issue like that. But as I said, as a leadership, as a people, we do not shy from that. If we want to show a good example to our region and take a lead on that one, we do it. And that's why, we have achieved a number of, I would call them objectives, which were very surprising to many around us, as well as the world. As you mentioned, we are the first country to commit to an economy-wide reduction in the emissions. Net zero commitment by the year 2050. Also, we actually now have 3 of the largest low-cost solar energy projects, which actually it is feeding into the grid system, which we expect by the year 2030, 25% of our energy will be coming from clean energy. Now, this is a road that will take us for some time. And when I start discussing this with the organizer from COP28, which is going to be held in Dubai on November, and as it is a United Nations sort of body that is overlooking that, they also sent me a message, basically, that I would like to read, if you don't mind, which is mainly addressing this based on the question that is raised, because I know I need to be within the framework of, some of the conferences and that usually held internationally and under the umbrella of the United Nations. Now, the message is as follows. There are some few reality checks that we have to look into. First, the world needs energy every day, every minute. Billions of people are actually using energy predominantly provided by oil and gas. There's no denying of that now. Second, we all want to achieve a net zero future, all of us. This is our environment. We want to breathe clean air. I will not comment about what has happened with the fire, and that's very simple actually here, which actually has no borders in terms we stop it. If something happened in one city in terms of unfortunately release some gases, that will go and move into the next city. So it's in a way we are not protected. So we are all sharing the same issue and same problems in there. And then there are actually two challenges that we have. And this is going to be a discussion on the COP28, those who are going to be attending that. How do we reconcile the need for energy while reducing emissions? The second is, how do we go faster because we are not going fast enough? The answer, and this is from the side of the UAE, is a balanced energy transition powered by partnership. We have to find a way to ensure everyone enjoys the development gains afforded by energy access, while at the same time tilting the balance more and more in the direction of clean energy. It will not happen overnight. So we have to have patience. We are running very quickly on that, trying to say the targets 2030, 2050, but that will require a lot of investments, huge investments. So we do it mainly, and this is very important, together, not one nation, not two, but every nation on this earth. We should have a common agenda how we address this challenging issue. Now, if we talk about the OE and progress, because that really highlights our approach here during what we have discussed right now. Today, we are a global leader with Masdar. Masdar, by the way, some of you might have visited. It's the only clean energy city in the world. It's next to the capital, Abu Dhabi. Everything there is run on clean energy. And I invite and wish some of you could go there. But also Masdar became an important investing structure in the renewable energy, where they put actually billions of dollars in projects across the globe. I'll give you some examples of these projects. One of the UK's largest wind producing projects in London area, clean energy production on small islands in the Caribbean and also in the Pacific. We have one of the largest wind producing partnership in Egypt, clean energy hydrogen shipment to Germany. If we look into our strategy to expand into new global partnership, we initiated the partnership to accelerate clean energy, which is PACE. It's a perfect example of what the future holds. This partnership with the US, we see around 100 billion invested in 100 gigawatt of clean energy by the year 2035. And I do hope that Canada also join with that initiative. We have already seen around $20 billion invested in the US. 300 million was just announced by PACE partners, along with Japan and South Korea, and also to support Romania to build a small nuclear reactor. What would PACE look like if more partnerships join the goal, which is $1 trillion? We have to think big, we have to think ambitious, and we are also to reach our objectives. This is mainly some of the objectives on the strategy of COP28. It has to be inclusive with the partnership. That's where we are inviting the big industrial players who are actually here with us and all stakeholders. We want them to retain the investment in joining this great movement. It's not only government. The private sector has to be part of that. The climate action and the energy transaction is going to be costly. The figures that we have estimated is going to be tens of trillions of dollars. By the time it's said to be done, that's monumental sum. It's quite huge, actually. But also, it should take some time. And it's not going to be done, and this is my gut feeling, 2050 is just going to be a stage. But that could take more than 50 to 100 years to reach the objective that we are talking about. So I do hope that, as I said, COP28, I'm limited by the message that they have given me. It will be being also held in the UAE, definitely you will see a much more cooperation, much stronger message in addressing the challenging situation of the climate change that we have, which we all see it right now. I mean, even in the desert, in the UAE, we notice the change in the climate. By the way, it's maybe a little bit more positive because we get more rain now than what we used to have. The temperatures are actually starting to cool down all the way to May, like what we have this year. So definitely there is a climatic change, but it also affects other places of the world in a more negative way. Thank you.
Thanks to you. When there's a will, there's a way. Mr. Loh, aligning the economy to 1.5 degree and sustainable growth are also critical priorities in Asia and in Singapore. What outcomes would you like to deliver, and what are the highlights of your actions, of your action plan at this time to deliver on 1.5 degree?
Asia hosts more than half of the world's population today, and contributes about 50% of global emission. Some estimates have suggested that Asia needs almost $1 trillion a year for the next 30 years in terms of net zero transition. And Asia is in particular very vulnerable to rising temperature, but at the same time, it offers the largest share of business opportunity in terms of transition finance or net zero pathways. And I think Asia is generally on the right path towards decarbonization, but I think the efforts needs to be accelerated in a much bigger way. And for Asia to have a sustainable, affordable, and also a secure, just energy transition, we can't look at a one-size-fits-all solution. The region is very diverse. Each country has its own culture, its own development, and has its own unique idiosyncrasy. So I think towards a net zero transition pathways, there are many stakeholders that has to play their part. And one big component would be investors. There is capital around globally. Investors need to really be at the forefront of mobilizing capital towards companies that are actively pursuing a net zero pathway. For an investor, you could either choose to, broadly speaking, invest in a low carbon company, or you could invest in a Paris-aligned benchmark framework, which is really regulatory led. Or you could also invest in companies that are taking concrete action, such as setting up a science-based target, disclose your pathway, measure that, show progress, and along the way, find new and green revenues. And I think those companies should be rewarded in that transition pathway. And I think investors can be part of that. Financial infrastructure, financial services, firms like the exchanges, we can be part of that. We're part of the ecosystem. We can help to cajole the ecosystem to develop sustainable solutions to do that. And in the earlier point, turning negative into positive, even governments clearly must have a role to play. And I think in Singapore, the government has also set up a financing net zero action plan that lays out strategies and steps to catalyze the transition and decarbonization efforts, not just in Singapore, but working with various countries, governments in the region, with various task force. And obviously, banks have to play a role, and then exchanges could help in that transition. We were the first Asian exchange and second globally to announce our 1.5 degrees pathway. So I think the challenge ahead of us, climate risk, is real and now. And I think there's a will, there's a way.
Thank you. So it's clear that investors require information. We need the capital flows, private sector, private finance, and public sector finance will be required to drive that transition. We're very pleased at Montreal to host one of the offices of the International Sustainability Standards Board to be able to provide global investors the information they need to allocate capital to sustainable growth and to drive a positive risk-adjusted return in an economy in transition. There are continents that face much bigger challenges. Let's reflect on Africa or South America, but Africa for a few minutes. We have real challenges here. You have real challenges, but if we look at the South, public debt in emerging markets rose to 65.7% of GDP as a result of COVID and of the war in Ukraine. Interest rates are going up, resulting in concerns of wave of debt restructuring. 9 low-income countries are in debt distress. 27 are at high risk of debt distress. China holds more than 50% of developing countries' official debt. Beijing said they want to help. They want to contribute to a new financial pact. There's going to be a summit in Paris, June 22nd, 23rd, aiming at expanding fiscal room for debt-distressed low-income countries to fight climate change, including channeling private sector investments to fill the development funding gap. So we have real challenges, but those challenges are daunting. And if we don't get those countries on board, it's not feasible to align the world to 1.5 degree. So, His Excellency, any thoughts on what you would like to see happen at the summit in Paris that could be further advanced at COP28 to really work together to fight one of those challenges of our century, like was alluded to earlier?
Yeah. I think if you look at the geography, you will see that we are located not too far from Africa. We are within Asia, West Asia, not far from Europe. So we have a good knowledge of historical knowledge also of all these regions as well as Africa. And for a long time, the UAE has played a major role in the economies of East Africa historically for 1,000 years almost. With that in mind, we connect with Africa also, as I said, in terms of how they think and how they would like to proceed their nation. They open up more with us. And during my time in the government, we came up with the proposal, which is creating this trilateral relationship. There is definitely a mistrust, and let's be frank about it, between the Africans and the Europeans in general, because of the history, you go back. With us, I think the approach was, let us try to put together the best in each one of us. The UAE have the ability, they have the skills, they have the financial ability to invest and provide for funds. Europeans have the same. And some African nations that we need to take as example of this trilateral cooperation that can be really successful, because the failure of the African model, as a lot of you know, is due to a lack of leadership, lack of proper structure, especially infrastructure within the African countries, lack of funding, and that can be provided for if that's and there is no strategy for a lot of these countries in terms of how they want to bring their countries out from that situation. We have the example of Abu Dhabi Development Fund, and it has pumped in billions of dollars in different projects in Africa, from dams to highways. The Canadians also, I understand, they are doing also the same in certain parts of that. But if we do not have a collective plan and maybe rank some of the countries in Africa based on the needs of development as they require it, and try to help them in terms of setting up the right projects that will actually benefit the growth in the economy of these nations, it is going to be a continuous process of losing these funds as we put it in there. Second, in terms of laws and regulations, and DP World, for example, Dubai ports, which is one of the largest port operator around the world with 75 ports, including maybe almost 12 or 13 in Africa itself. Even with that kind of investment, we still face some issues. It is sometimes the African governments have to recognize one thing. Investments come to Africa to also make money, provide jobs, but also make money. So that sort of thinking has to be understood by the leadership in these nations. The only way, and I come back to the Paris conference, to come out of that is rather than going immediately and trying to fund projects here and there. There was a Marshall Plan at one time for Europe. This is a different kind of Marshall Plan that is post-COVID, with maybe identifying certain nations who would like to be partners in Africa, as well as from the European side, from our side, from the global side, from Asia, from North America, and to work within the range of these countries who are willing to set an example for them. I mean, we dealt with Ethiopia, for example, and that was a very successful model with them. Within our range as a country, as a UAE, we also dealt with some West African countries, and there are great opportunities also there for them. And they have started making a change in there, but we cannot do it alone. We are a very small country at the end of the day.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing. Thanks to the two of you for sharing your wisdom with the audience this morning. Need collaboration and leadership like never before to address the crisis of our century. So thank you for the opening of the forum.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bonjour. Good morning. My name is Elliott Portnoy. I have the honor of serving as the global CEO of Dentons, the world's largest global law firm. We serve clients in over 200 locations in 83 countries and proudly have nearly 120 years of rich history here in Quebec, where we have an exceptionally talented and diverse team guiding our clients through this unprecedented period of transition. We've just heard, with my thanks, an insightful, thought-provoking, and truly outstanding discussion about thriving in a world of transition, the unique challenges in the Eurozone, a distinctive and ultimately successful response in the UAE to the pandemic, lessons learned in Singapore and more broadly across ASEAN and Asia, the opportunities and the challenges of COP28, both from the perspective of the host of COP28 and from Asia. And you've heard from our speakers the way in which they seek to turn negatives into positives. This is yet one more demonstration of the extraordinary depth of experience and vision represented on stage at the conference, which our firm is very proud to have long sponsored. As these panelists compellingly remind us, our world is shifting quickly. Against the backdrop of accelerating change, many observers forecast a world of increasing deglobalization and economic decoupling. One needs only to pick up a newspaper or listen to a favorite podcast to hear about the purportedly inevitable shift towards a less interconnected economy. That is, to be sure, the conventional wisdom, but my colleagues and I at Dentons and our panelists see the world in a far more nuanced way. While a shift towards a less interconnected world seems inevitable, we, and I would contend this conference, stand as a counterpoint. At Dentons, we are, if you will, all in on globalization and believe that the talk of dismantling of the global economy is hardly inevitable. Amidst the tumult of rising geopolitical tensions, a war in Ukraine, the lingering effects of the pandemic, and a real threat to the economy, we continue to believe, as we believe you do, that success comes from navigating and harnessing the still very abundant opportunities that exist from interconnection in an evolving multipolar world. Each day we navigate for our clients in Quebec that are actively engaging globally, and our clients around the world as they need sophisticated counsel to thrive and manage risk in a more splintered market. We proudly became the first global law firm just 2 weeks ago to open in India. And our nearly 22,000 people worldwide don't see a world that is deglobalizing. The world is, to be sure, evolving among economic and political zones, and there clearly is a shift from the unconscious globalization of the past to a more conscious globalization going forward. But we find that this shift to a multipolar world is creating more, not less, demand for our services. Our experience, and indeed that of our clients across most industry sectors in Quebec and around the globe, confirms that the world remains highly interconnected and trade flows have proved to be remarkably resilient. Our law firm was formed on the belief that talent and opportunities are abounding in every market, and that to connect talent to those opportunities, we need to be more in and of the community in each of the more than 200 cities in 83 countries around the world in which we do business. We're able to provide that high quality counsel and business solutions around the world because of our in-depth understanding of the local business markets and cultures in which we and our clients operate. We are local and global, just as we are here in Quebec. So as you share perspectives and ideas with one another over the next few days, I urge you to embrace and harness the benefits of global interconnection. No economy, no sector is truly self-sufficient, and I hope this conference continues to stand for the proposition that fostering global relationships and enhancing collaboration will help us address the most pressing issues of our time, from climate change to poverty reduction during this period of unprecedented transition. My thanks to our outstanding panel for their insights, and on behalf of the 22,000 people of Dentons, and in particular my colleagues in our Montreal office, my best wishes for a productive conference. Thank you and merci beaucoup.